Ask everyone to, if I could ask everyone to mute their sound, and we can at the end of our first part of this session, we'll open it up to Q&A. So I want to thank everyone for coming. We'll get started now because there's a lot to talk about. Our guest today is David Emmons. I've known Dave for quite a long time. He's a wonderful scholar. He's based out in Montana, where he joined the University of Montana in the late 60s. Doesn't want to date himself. He's a graduate of the University of Colorado at Boulder, from which he received his BA, MA, and PhD, and has spent most of his working life out in the West. He's the grandson of Italian, not Irish, immigrants, and grew up in a multi-ethnic neighborhood on the north side of Denver in the St. Catherine of Siena Parish. Uh, he tells us he was raised and remains Catholic. So he's very familiar with the communities he writes about, which are mostly working class Irish laborers. On a sidebar, his wife is Irish. Her maiden name is Dollard, and she's got roots close to us in Albany. And this is a fascinating bit. Her grandfather, his name was Michael Francis Dollard. He was known as Dyke. He paved Albany streets, did very well, and was said to have owned 50 horses, which today is significant because we're about to watch the Derby after we're done here. And his grandfather appears by name in one of William Kennedy's Albany cycle books, the Old Albany, book, and which I think is very cool. And Kennedy used a lot of real air quote real people in his books So that's a very cool snippet. And she extends her greetings to all of our friends and listeners up in the upstate area. But today we're going to talk about Dave's latest book, History's Erratics, Irish Catholic Dissidents and the Transformation of American Capitalism between 1870 and 1930. And this is the third in a trilogy of books that Dave has written about the Irish Catholic working class in the West, which is a departure for a lot of what we read about the Irish labor in America, because most of it is centered in the industrial cities on the East Coast and some in the West. But the idea of the Irish prospering anywhere in the West is sort of atypical. So his work is fascinating. And the first of his books was the Butte Irish, and they created a community in the 19th century that mirrored a lot of the communities we know existed in the cities and the urban centers of the East Coast, for all the same reasons. They circled around family, jobs, and the church, and there were women out there too, which helped with the family aspect of it. So they prospered where a lot of other Irish who went west out of American cities did not. So the themes that Dave introduced in his Butte book and in his second book find their way into History's Erratics. And I found fascinating reading the book, and I urge you all to read it, is that it's a book that is clearly the work of decades of research, thinking, sort of studying who the Irish were and what they did in the different areas of their lives. And he uses historical records. He uses political theory, labor theory, immigration patterns in America and in Ireland, and best of all, he uses literature, which I think is fantastic because it really creates a lot of color for his prose. So I have a lot of questions, and let's get started. So first of all, Dave, how did you come up with the name Erratics, and what does it mean?
Well, first of all, I was not dealing, as you can tell from the start date, 1870. I did deal with famine immigration in earlier books, not as much because the famine immigrants were unlikely to go west, except for those who went to California. So I was dealing with the later post-famine immigration with the 1870. But I still found them almost as incomprehending, non-comprehending of American culture as the earlier immigrants of the 1840s and 50s. It was a cultural divergence. They were out of time, as I put it, out of time and out of place. It was I hated to call them I don't like the phrase pre-modern. I think it's a term of reproach, and it suggests that they were about to improve, they were going to get better. There's a teleological aspect of pre-modern that I don't like. So I call them really more non-modern, but that didn't make for a very good title. And I had a climbing partner who was a geologist, a petrologist, a student of rocks. And I remember him talking about what are called glacial erratics, rocks that are brought. They could be metamorphic. They could have been igneous. I don't know enough about rocks, but there were rocks brought from their native ground by glaciers into an area far south of that native ground. The glaciers then withdrew, abandoning, essentially orphaning the rocks, left them then in a place that was not known to them, among other rocks that did not know or necessarily like them. Rocks, I grant, don't have much of a culture, but they do have. They come from a place, and they come in time. They come in geological time. So I found the Irish to be out of time and out of place. Everywhere in America. I don't think any more so in the West than in the East.
This is fun.
I quite intentionally urged the press, University of Illinois Press, to put a non-Western picture on the title on the cover page, and that photograph you see is of James Connolly in New York City. I wanted to kind of,
right?
I think, yeah, right, right, right across the street from NYU. But there's the IWW banner is there. I like that. I like the fact there's a little bit of Irish of Gaelic of Irish language in one of those banners. But I wanted to put a little bit of distance between myself and the West. The book on Butte, obviously, the, the best city in America is Western, and the second book was Western. And I wanted to branch out a little bit. This third one was going to be extended, but I felt that there was a cultural divide between Irish Catholics and a very, very aggressive and self-consciously Protestant America. Add the working class into all of that, and you have an erratic population. You have people who are not, I use the word dissident because I still think it's the best word for this. They weren't radical. Well, some of them were, and I talk about them. They weren't revolutionary. They were simply not comprehending. They didn't get it. And the more they learned about American culture, the less they liked it. And so they will move from non-comprehension to dislike, and in some instances, from dislike will move toward determined to change. The involvement of Irish in the labor movement is obvious and much reported on. Historians have never ignored that, but I think they brought with them some cultural habits, some cultural values, some sensibilities, a lot of words for culture and all of this, but I think they brought with them some that were distinctly contrarian. So hence Erratics, made for a kind of a catchy title, but it's I stole it from the petrologists. They were out of time and out of place.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see, or in your, what do you see as the source of that displacement, or that sort of misalignment with the culture they found in the U.S.?
There's much debate. There are a few cultural historians left, but there's no real agreement on the source of culture. I would begin by saying it is not racial. This is not something I'm saying is passed down in some kind of Irish gene pool. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a racial inheritance. Uh, the simple answer, and I think it's the best one, is history. Culture is formed by what happens to a people. And in the instance of Irish Catholics, we're dealing with the people who were subjugated. We're dealing with the people who were colonial. We're dealing with the people whose language was stolen from them. We're dealing with the people who were, well, I'll put it this way, and we can talk about it later if anybody wants to, who are allowed to starve. I don't know that I do not refer to the famine as a genocide, but I do certainly insist that it was ethnic cleansing and that it was allowed to happen. Yeats has a poem in which he refers to all of Ireland's ancestral sorrows. Um, and they were a sorrowing and sorrowful people. Murphy's Law was named after Murphy for a reason. But obviously this produced a people with a different set of cultural habits from those who, like the self-consciously Protestant Americans, came from a world in which that they considered to be providentially blessed. Uh, American was the lucky place. Ireland was a sorrowing place, and so you're talking then about one set of people who have one set of ideas. Society is organized on the basis of a culture that is different from the society and the culture um, of the nation to which they came. Um,
So
it
the
was a volatile mix. It had to be. They didn't fit.
mhm. So do you think that so for in simplistic terms that you don't see that the Irish came here to be saved or to be rescued from what was happening in Ireland, that they saw America as a place for themselves to prosper. They just had to get out of where they were. I think at one point you said they came because they were hungry. Um,
Yeah, I think yeah, there's a self-congratulatory aspect. A lot of those in America's sense of itself that that insists that immigrants, whether from my grandparents from Italy or the Irish, that everybody wanted to be here. Um, I don't know that I don't call the Irish exiles. There was what the historian Kirby Miller calls the exile motif. There is a great deal of in the letters that were written back from Irish immigrants back to Ireland that indicate that they thought of themselves as forced out of Ireland. I mean, you could certainly make a case in the 1840s that was the case in the late 1840s. I don't think you could quite say that in the 1870s. They were not exiles in the technical legal sense of the word. John Mitchell may have been, but I can't think of any others. But that they chose to leave. They did have agency. They're not being driven out. It was a choice, but that doesn't mean they wanted to leave.
okay.
Choosing to leave and wanting to leave are two very different things, and very few of them wanted to leave. Uh, Homesickness was a cultural residue of all of this. So it's not a perfect pairing with the people who believe themselves providentially blessed. Uh,
Mm.
Nor did it buttress the idea that everyone wanted to be here, that the Irish couldn't wait to get out of Ireland. It couldn't. They came here because they wanted to get something to eat. They wanted a job. The idea that they wanted to be made free, I doubt that was an abstraction. I don't think that had much of an influence. And that is as true of the immigrant of 1890 as it was the immigrant of 1850.
Hmm. And there's a lot of reference to the communal aspect of the Irish mindset, the mentality of staying together, being a communal society. Do you think that explains why why they tended to stay together? In either the city or when they did succeed or move forward as a group, it was because they stayed together. They tend, in American cities, they tend to stay together longer, marry within their own culture longer than other ethnic groups do. Do you think that's accident, culture, behavior? Like, do you think it's
Oh, I think very much
pragmatism?
cultural.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll use the word and I hope it'll be understood and not misunderstood. There's a certain tribal aspect to this. So a
Mm.
lot of the community, the sociability of the Irish was really more by townland and county, certainly by county. Uh, Enormous rivalries between, say, Cork and Kerry. There were language differences, regional dialects. One of the interesting aspects of the immigration is that the Corkonian and the Kerryman. Well, let's make a wider divide. Let's go from Waterford to Donegal. In Ireland, that was you might as well have been from separate planets.
Mm.
Once they got to New York, or once they got to Chicago or Butte, all of a sudden, the Americans did not acknowledge these communal ties to townland and county and province and parish. They acknowledged only Irishness. And so the Irish were probably coming more together in America than they were in Ireland itself. Uh, but the communalism is, it was partly defensive, but it's the hardest of the sensibilities of Irish Catholics. It's the hardest for me to explain. Uh, but you sense it. You there's the clannishness of the Irish worlds was you could feel it. It was palpable. Uh, the great English historian of labor, E.P. Thompson, once said that there was a working class structure of feeling to the working class neighborhoods in essentially industrializing England, early 19th century. I think, partly from my own background, where I grew up, when I grew up, where I grew up, that there is an Irish Catholic, and certainly a Catholic structure of feeling to the neighborhoods in which the Irish were dominant. Um, and, I think structure, in other words, they felt working class. These neighborhoods, Butte feels Irish and Catholic to me. It feels that way to them too. They talk about themselves in that context. It's their place.
Hmm.
Where the source of it, I think there's historical roots. First of all, what other friends do they have? Uh, they necessarily counted on one another, but their society and their economy was what one historian has called a gift economy. It's a society and an economy based on reciprocity, on sharing. The American notion of it's your misfortune and none of my own was unimaginable to a people for
Hmm.
whom society was an organic unit. Your misfortune was my misfortune. Um, a bountiful potato crop, for example, uh, in the say, well, name a year, was not reason for the beneficiary of that crop to go off into the market and sell the surplus at a profit and take the profit and eat for his own benefits. The ample harvest, the heavy harvest, was a blessing and a privilege because it allowed the beneficiary to share, to grant favors in the assumption, and it's a very solid one, that the favors would be returned. And so out of community was something that grew organically as the societies that it created became organic. They were things. This was not simply fraternity at work. It, and obviously there's a very powerful Catholic influence here, but uh, I think it was more Irish than just Catholic. I don't think the Italian Catholics that I grew up with certainly did not have quite the same feeling. I don't think the German Catholics that I knew well had the same feeling. It is not uniquely Irish, but it is especially evident among the Irish.
So the concept of the individual would have been anathema to them.
it had no standing. No, American story. Here's an American iconic, Daniel Boone, and Daniel Boone became an American folk hero. And he left and moved farther west the minute he could see the smoke of a neighbor's cabin. I mean, that was pathological to an Irishman. If you get up one morning and there's smoke from a cabin, the first thing you do is not run off farther to the west. You go to see who's making the smoke and would they like to sit down, have a drink and a chat. Who are you? Who am I? What are you doing here? There was too much of the American. It is an American myth, but that's okay. We're not talking history here so much as what the self-definition of a people. But the Daniel Boone idea, it's your misfortune and none of my own idea. The mind your own business idea. The rugged or not so rugged individualism, the unregulated markets, the competition. None of that rang true. So they reach an accord, a mutual accord, a mutual accommodation, as John Callahan put it. We'll give you our labor, you give us a measure of tolerance.
But there wasn't always that tolerance. So
exactly right. Yeah,
this
is not assimilate. This is not assimilation. This is simply making your way. Let's reach some kind of an accord, a mutual accord, and this in the face of some really rather intense prejudice.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because what you do is, I think, in a lot of your chapters is instead of looking at the reaction of the host country to the Irish when they came over, is you turn the lens around and say, well, this is what the Irish saw when they came in, and instead of viewing them as somewhat backward or not able to really understand the American way, that they did understand it, they just didn't like it, and so
it wasn't their way. Nor did it seem to them, and the word has to come up. It was a way that was without moral conscience. There was a powerful element of unfairness to it. And this was where this really hit, I think, hardest and with greatest effect, most important effect, is the near reverence of American, particularly after 1870 and the industrialization and development of an industrial capitalist society, but the veneration of laissez-faire market economies, where, again, a bountiful potato crop allows you to sell the surplus, make a lot of money, and move out. They never wanted to move out. They wanted moving up. For example, they were very risk averse. That's understandable. Had my life been similar to theirs, had I shared what they shared, had I heard the stories that they heard, had the lived experiences been what theirs were, I probably would have been risk averse too. But you don't move out, you don't move up. Social mobility is built into the American creed. Every day, the idea that you're going to work for wages and you're going to all of a sudden be hiring others and paying them wages. But as you move up, you move out. And moving out takes you out of the community. It takes you out of it's kind of collective. It's not enforced by state. It's simply it's a cultural sensibility. Moving up, move out.
And how much you talked about how much does Catholicism play into this?
Well, I think it plays enormously in it. I wanted, however, to emphasize the Irishness of it. The Americans tended not even to distinguish. Now, let's acknowledge there were a whole bunch of Protestant Irish. There were Protestants from Ireland or left from Ireland who were identified as Irish. They left from Irish ports, but they never thought of themselves as Irish. They took the name Scotch Irish. They were predominantly, well, either low church, Anglican, or Presbyterian for the most part, voted overwhelmingly for the Republican Party, Irish Catholics as overwhelmingly for the Democratic. Uh, so they encountered this kind of alien environment all the time, and they commented on it. Now, they're not going to be writing the articles that Americans will write about them,
Mm.
but every now and again you get some hints, and you can assume, at least I always have, that the priests were reading what was being said about the Irish Catholics, shared what they had read with the parish, with the people of the parish. But they also shared talk. They talked among themselves about what they had seen, what they had observed. So we don't have as full a record of this as we do of the nativism directed toward them, but there certainly were some rather strong feelings coming from the other direction. It's
Hmm.
not just that Americans were judging the Irish were judging the Americans as well.
Hmm.
Uh, not always in favorable terms, very frequently in quite unfavorable terms.
I guess in New York, the most famous example would probably be John Hughes, who wrote under a pseudonym in Philadelphia and here, and just went back at the negative commentary about Catholics in both cities, and I mean more than erratic, he threatened them with violence if they didn't back down or back off.
Right, and there were John Hughes had his equivalent, Father Peter York in San Francisco, Father Michael Hannon in Butte,
Mm.
and there were others who were defensive. They did not surrender. There's no surrender to this accommodation. There's a social surrender because they didn't have much of an option. They lived here. They had to make their way through society, but there were elements of their culture that made that more difficult. For example, well, clannishness we talked about, a certain near semi-anarchy. The laws they had the respect for the law did not come easily for any colonial, but particularly from the Irish colonials, where the law imposed by the British government, by the British imperial government, where those laws were enforced with such discriminatory effect. Uh, the idea of an Irishman taking an oath against another Irishman in an English court of law, a British court of law, was just unimaginable. You don't a tribal people, a clannish people, do not treat their friends that way. Um, so that goes all the way back to Shannon's book on the Irish. So you got this semi-anarchy, you got a powerful Anglophobia. Uh, I don't think that. Well, that was a very quick story. A student of religion and I like his books a lot. Robert Orsi, an Italian, was he told a story one time and reflected on as a graduate student at Yale. And he's in the library, and the distinguished elderly senior historian of American religion, Sidney Ahlstrom, wanders through the library, and Orsi, as graduate students would want to do, has to has to chat it up with the senior professor. So he tries to think of a question that he can ask a historian of American religion, and he asks Professor Ahlstrom, "Do you think there will ever be another anti-Catholic movement in America?" And Ahlstrom's reply, I can imagine it beginning, "Young man, America is an anti-Catholic movement." Well, I had to reverse that. Does that then make Catholicism somehow an anti-American movement? And if so, in what way? Orsi uses the word subversive. He doesn't mean that the Irish Catholics or the Catholics were subversive in a political sense, but they were culturally subversive. We're back to Daniel Boone, I suppose, but there were any more important ways of showing a contrarian spirit. Um,
I mean, that lasts
Denver,
up to 1960 with Kennedy, that
oh
he had to
boy,
address the
then,
preachers in Houston to get them to sort of see that he wasn't inviting the Pope over
right, that was
by the end of
my
November.
first presidential vote, by the way. And
Wow.
I mean, uh, uh, oh yeah, I mean, Denver during my when I just after I was born or before I was born, but it retained much of it. Denver's mayor was a Klansman. Governor of Colorado was a Klansman. There, the black population of Denver was not sufficient to justify that, but the Catholic certainly
Mm.
was, and the Jewish well, and was joined. So, oh yeah, I mean, I lived with it. Um,
Yeah, it's hard to believe. We have had two Catholic presidents, Catholic vice president, but and I guess I will save this question last because your research ends in 1930, and how long does this sense of the Irish, clannishness, cultural solidarity last generationally? Second, third generation, does it dissipate? Do they finally start to assimilate, intermarry, whatever?
well, uh, I one whole chapter is given over to what I call the Butte Rising of 1917. And very, very briefly, there was Butte. We're in the war. We're in the Great War. We have entered it. Woodrow Wilson has declared that copper is the single most important material of war. Steel runs a close second. Butte, Montana, and Anaconda, Montana, the smelter city that's 25 miles away, produce more copper than any other place in the world. Butte is an overwhelmingly Irish city, the most Irish city in America. In percentage terms, higher percentage in Butte than any town in America, east, west, or any in between. Uh, the miners' union and the mine workforce overwhelmingly Irish. The strike of 1917 lasted for 6 months, closed all of the mines. The military, the army, it occupied Butte. It protected strike breakers. Gun control laws were in place. You couldn't have more than, I think, 4 people could meet on the sidewalk at any given time. Frank Little, an IWW organizer, was dragged from a boarding house and hanged by parties unknown. It was a horrible, terrible, terrible time. But the question has got to be, the strike was called by the Pierce Connolly Club. It was not called by a union. It was called by an Irish nationalist club named after Patrick Pierce and James Connolly, the leaders of the 1916 Irish Rising, hence Butte Rising, just a year later. Um, it's so I'm trying to distinguish here, but how much of this strike is Irish, how much of it is later? But the fact is that a great number of established Irish miners walked off the Butte Hill in 1917 at a time when the United States, their new nation, their new home, had a compelling need for the product that they made. Why did they do that? Well, the last line of that chapter is because America had not yet given them reason not to. Now, there's a key word there. It's the only thing that saves me from being in all kinds of trouble. And that key word is yet.
Mm.
Uh, by 1940, certainly, the old joke was that the FBI used to line up outside the graduating class at Fordham and pick them off as the Irish Catholic kids left Fordham and enroll them immediately in the FBI. They were no longer a subversive element. They were now, Marion Casey's new book on
Hmm.
where do you place the green, where do you find them. They've
Right.
gone from erratic to almost iconic, almost heroic. Interestingly, though, it's Barry Fitzgerald in the movies, not Al Pacino. It's Irish Catholicism that is being celebrated here, not Catholicism as such. The
Hmm.
bells of St. Mary's, not the bells of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, for example. Um, but the Irish began to enjoy a much, much better press. They earned it. They did so because, during World War II, they participated fully. And even during the Great War, during World War One, the Butte strike was not quite unique to Butte, but close enough that I don't want to draw any general inferences from the walkout. And the strike, this A strike, was called by the Pierce Connolly Club. The strike came because of the speculator mine fire, the huge tragedy in the Granite Mountain shaft of the speculator shaft, Granite Mountain shaft of the speculator mine. 168 men were incinerated, the greatest number of deaths in the history of American hard rock mining. That's what caused the strike, and a union was formed to conduct that strike. But a strike had been called 3 days before the fire, 3 days before the tragedy. And there was considerable violence, a couple of hundred, more than that, probably somewhere near 1,000 rebels were arrested 2 days or 3 days before the fire. And the strike call came from, was written by an Irishman, William Francis Dunn, and it came, and he was writing as a member of and for the Pierce Connolly Irish Independence Club. So is it an Irish strike? Is it an anti-war strike? Is it a labor strike? A strike was called, the strike was a labor strike.
The timing, 1916, 1917, 1916, Easter Uprising, 1970, World War I, were aligned with Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
The Irish are fighting Great Britain. I mean, there's a lot there to suggest that was political.
Well, here's another example, again, from Butte. In 1915, the war has begun. We're not in it. The United States is not in it. And St. Patrick's Day, Butte still has a huge St. Patrick's Day celebration. The St. Patrick's Day celebration in 1915 was presided over by Father James English, strange last name, but not an uncommon Irish surname from County Limerick. But Father James English, St. Mary's Parish, gave a speech and he praised the eagle of the fatherland. That's Germany. There were 3 flags on full display in Butte on St. Patrick's Day, 1915. 4, actually, if you count the Austrian. German flag, Austrian flag, American flag, Irish flag. Now, Woodrow Wilson had said, we will be neutral in thought, word, and deed, on wishes that he had been himself, taking his own counsel, but that's a different story. The Irish were in Butte, and this is true nationwide. They were not neutral. In the proclamation of the Irish Republic of 1916, Patrick Pearse had written and thanked our gallant allies in Europe, by which he meant Germany. He also thanked our exiled children in America. Exile would suggest, by the way, force, not a
choice.
A choice, not an immigration of the sort that Americans prized. So, but the gallant allies reference is just remarkable. Ireland was provisional Republican Ireland. The proclamation of 1916, Germany was identified as a gallant ally. You know who became a gallant ally after that was the Bolshevik Russians. Lenin was the first to acknowledge Connolly and Pearse and the rising in Ireland in 1916 as a legitimate exercise in worker rights. It happened as well to be a rebellion in the name of national rights, but there was a strong working class element in 1916. So it's a mix. You bring the two together. And, Connolly had said the cause of Ireland is the cause of labor, the cause of labor is the cause of Ireland. The two cannot be dissevered. Uh, well, Bill Dunn in Butte was an electrician. He said that the two causes were fused, which I suppose is might be a better metaphor than well, woven together or quilted or whatever other you might use. So but the key word there is yet. And so to get back finally to your question earlier, things changed. The Irish changed. They did intermarry more. They did advance. Most of the advance was within class rather than jumping out of it, because again, they did not want to leave the neighborhood.
Mm.
You mentioned literature. I think one of the two infrequently read Irish writers is Finlay Peter Dunne. I think Martin Dooley had his wisdom is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
He told little stories, but they say a very, very great deal about the Irish. And so
What's good about those
all
is
of it changes.
yeah, but with the Dunn thing, the Mr. Dooley is also he's very Irish, but he's also very American. They're very aware of what's going on around them, there were a couple of stories in there that suggest sort of a sadness that they've moved away from the communal about the little woman, the little widow who dies, and there's I was thinking about that reading your book that he really reflects what you're talking about.
Oh, there, Mike. I quote extensively from one of his newspaper accounts where Hennessy, his favorite customer, Martin Dooley runs a Chicago bar, and Hennessy comes in and he says, "I'm going to go to Alaska, or I'm going to kick up gold, and I'm going to get rich." And Dooley's final word to him, and when you get rich, don't ever come back in here. Actually, I don't think that there was anything wrong. I don't think the Irish objected to anyone being rich. That was fine. I do think they objected to people being greedy, people
Right.
not sharing, to people who used their wealth to lord it over anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But
Getting above yourself.
yeah, but what's interesting is that they didn't move from working class to middle class. They more often moved from unskilled labor to skilled labor.
Mm-hmm.
Or they stayed in the neighborhood by moving into various commercial enterprises, bars, certainly, grocery stores, or they became general contractors, plumbers, electricians, but they stayed in the neighborhood. That's where they're friends. And the word friend means so much more in Irish than it does in America, in English. They stayed in the neighborhood. Among their friends. A lot of their friends were people they couldn't stand, didn't want to be around, but they were, in the Irish sense, they were a part of this organic community.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, I had mentioned in the introduction that this work seems like it's accumulation of a lot of years of study and reading and thinking. What was the light switch that made you say, "Oh, it's erratics. That's what I'm seeing through all this study
Well,
of the Irish."
some of it probably not consciously, but some of it probably came from growing up where I did, when I did, uh, how I did. Uh, you sense it. There's a structure of feeling, but a lot of it came from, well, for example, Alstrom's comment, "Young man, America is an anti-Catholic movement." Well, then reverse that. Is Catholicism an anti-American movement? If so, in what way? Well, all of a sudden, you've got to investigate much of this. What is happening here that so divides? And I'll make it a little bit more sectarian than it had to be. But what divides Protestant America from Catholic Irish? Notice, by the way, in this book, I deal with the Protestant Irish because you have to, but
Mhm.
they are not parties to this. I think I said in there somewhere that this is not a fight I picked. I'm not, I'm not denying the significance of the Protestant Irish, the Protestants from Ireland who came here. I am disputing that they were erratic, that they found that they were out of time and out of place. They made a rather quick and easy adjustment, partly because the Americans made a quick and easy adjustment to them. We talk about Kennedy, they can go back and talk about Andy Jackson. So it's, we're talking about a difference of 130 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was the acknowledgement, their acknowledgement of it and the source of it. And there were three places where this really came in. I'll share only one. There's a book by David Hackett Fisher, historian, and it's called Albion's Seed. And Albion being the old way, or the old Latin way of saying England. And it's on the transfer of British folklore to America. And by folk, I mean, he has something like folkways, and he has about 30, more than 30 of them. There's time ways and marriage ways, love ways, money ways, some 30 of these folkways. And they come from Britain to America. But Britain includes Scotland and Wales and England. Conspicuous by its absence from this list is Ireland, except, and Fisher points this out very specifically, the Protestant sections of northeastern Ulster. E.P. Thompson, the English historian of labor, did exactly the same thing in his great book, The Making of the English Working Class. He had a whole section, small sections, big book, small section about 20 pages long, Irish Catholics who came into that in pre-industrial English working class. He gives no time to the Scots or the Welsh. The reason being that they were, in fact, English enough that they didn't deserve the special attention. The Irish were different enough that they did. And then finally, an Irish Protestant, Horace Plunkett, Count Plunkett, who in his book, Ireland in the New Century, was talking about how the Irish Catholics were figured to do rather poorly as the new century opened. He wrote the book in 1904. But he left a place for northeastern Ulster because he said it had been settled by Scots who brought with them Presbyterian sensibilities. Well, after being, if these contemporaries sensed this, then it was something that I had to look at because I sensed, Thompson calls it as I said, a working class structure of feeling. I think he was just sort of backing off, saying it felt working class. Historians aren't supposed to say things like that. What do you mean it felt working class? What does that mean? How are you going to footnote feelings? But right. I think they're there. And I grew up in a place that felt working class. Thompson does try to give some examples of it, reading the newspapers, where do you go to church on Sunday? Very much a part of it. How do you raise your children? But the structure of feeling of Irish Catholic worlds was not the same. It was different. And that was true in New York. It was true in Melrose, Iowa. Tiny little Irish Catholic farming community in north central Iowa, south central Iowa, and it, quick story from there. A book, wonderful book, Holding Up the Hills, written by Father Leo Ward, who was a Notre Dame, rural sociologist at Notre Dame, and he grew up in Melrose. And he's talking about, their world. And it's at a time, well, first of all, the Irish that went to Melrose tended to be all from Roscommon, Cavan, north central, interior Ireland. And they landed in Galveston. This is in the 1850s. They made their way up the Mississippi River looking for good land. They found some in this area of Melrose, but it had been previously, this is prior to the Homestead Act, by the way. So it had been settled up previously by Indianans, Protestants, but there were more Irish. There were more of them. So they kind of took over the town of Melrose, at which time the Indianans disinterred their dead and moved back to Indiana. Well, the only thing the Irish knew about these people was that they called themselves Hoosiers. And from that point forward, growing up in Melrose, Iowa, a Hoosier was the Mormon equivalent of a Gentile. Anybody who was not Irish and Catholic was a Hoosier. They could have been anything else. They were all Hoosiers. Well, this is as Sabbatarian legislation, blue laws came into the American political discourse, where you can't do this on Sunday, you can't walk on the grass in the parks, and all of these sort of rules. One of them was you can't play ball on Sundays. Well, they played ball. Every Sunday in Melrose, they went to mass. That's the way Father Ward put it. We went to mass and then we played ball. We played baseball. And because we knew that what was not wrong was right. Okay, that's an interesting way of describing right. What is right? What's not wrong? But then he added, and didn't really pay enough attention to this until sort of after the book came out. The concluding sentences were Irish after all. Like this is something unique to us. We know, and I don't know that Father Ward thought that no one else in the world thought this way or not, but we think and we know that what is not wrong is right. Or what, as he put it the other way, what is right is what is not wrong. But it either way, we are Irish after all.
Yeah, that's why the other element in your book, which I think is so strong, is that you bring in anecdotal stories and you bring in the literature, which helps explain the what you're trying to say without the footnotes that his historical research and documentation requires. So the Mary Doyle Curran and the Mr. Dooley stories encapsulate what you're trying to say, and I think that's one of the strengths of the book is bringing those in where you can't really quantify it, but you can explain it through how the Irish talk about themselves through their own stories.
Well, only stories can do certain things. Like, I live in Montana. We have a large Native population here with 7 Indian reservations, and we have a number, I think there's almost 400 Native Indian and American Indian students at the U. And beginning in 1831, England went about systematically breaking down the Irish language. They changed the names of Irish schools. They changed the names of Irish towns. They changed the names of Irish everything. They changed Irish names. And the effect of all of this was Emmett Larkin, the historian, says it put them in a place of what he calls internal exile. They named everything. The Irish named everything. And I think they christened everything. They didn't move around a lot. So they could say this rock has a name, that little rill has a name, that everything has a name. It's christened. Well, now all of the names have been changed and they don't recognize them. How do you footnote that? I mean, what is the effect of all of that? Well, you know who got it immediately? Were the Indian kids who lost their languages.
Mm.
And so how do I, the favorite play of the Native American students at the University of Montana? Probably guess it, Brian Friel's translations. No one makes it clearer to them the full effect of being translated, losing your name, losing the name of your townland, losing the name of everything that you have ever known. And then, of course, you begin to go to the British common schools. The curriculum has changed. All of the courses are in English. The school day begins with a little ditty that concludes by saying, I thank the God in these happy days making me an English child. And again, the Indian kids will read that and they don't know whether to laugh or cry.
Mhm.
They
But
went
they can
through,
relate. Yeah.
oh, and a lot of them have actually begun to not to study Irish, but they do want to know more about the Gaelic League. They want to
Mhm.
know more about playing Irish games. They want to play their own games. They want to know more about the Irish dance, about Irish music, about Irish sport. And mostly they want to recover something of their language. Um, you said I use literature. I went all the way back to the 16th century. It was Edmund Spenser who said that language is the reflection of the heart. You want to change the heart of the people, the soul of the people, the sensibilities, the culture of the people, change the language. I think that's absolutely right.
Mhm.
And Friel's Brian Friel's play, Translations, I think is absolutely brilliant. There is nothing that any historian has ever said that I've read about the famine that makes what it did to the Irish people as clear as
Yeah.
what Friel's play does. So where else would I go? I'll
Mhm.
go with him.
Yeah. No, it really works. Um, well, we're getting near the end before we open it up, but I guess we can't leave without thinking or getting to the transformation of American capitalism. At the end of all this, what exactly did the Irish uh, do to the,
Uh,
or how was how was capitalism
well,
transformed?
I relied a lot on uh, an economist from Budapest, writing in 1944. His name was Karl Polanyi,
Mm,
and he in his The Great Transformation. One of the reasons I use the word not translation, great transformation. One of the reasons I used that word transformation of American capitalism is because I wanted to reflect Polanyi's book. But he's talking about what happened in beginning in England and the beginnings of industrial capitalism and what will become almost a secular faith. If I could do that whole book all over again, I would put more emphasis on the veneration of markets. They turn markets into something almost godlike. And for example, there's a new book that some of you may be familiar with, and all of you should be, Padraig Scanlon's wonderful title called Rot, R-O-T, Rot. It's an imperial subtitle, Imperial History of the Irish Famine. Scanlon's a young Irish American, teaches in Canada. It's a marvelous book. And he makes clear what Jim Donnelly at the University of Wisconsin, historian, had written earlier, that the famine was not genocide, but the famine was because the devotion to free market economies. And so here, the Irish watched all of these ships leaving Ireland, loaded up with dairy products, meat products, grains of a variety of sorts, beer, whiskey, all that they had produced, but it didn't belong to them. It was under contract, and it was a part of an international or transatlantic, or well, trans-Irish Sea. It was there to be provided to the English working class. It didn't belong to them, and the market dictated where it would go. As the market would dictate labor wages, as the market would dictate to whom you could sell, from whom you would buy, at what price you would charge. There's no morality to market driven. I'm not saying it's immoral. I happen to think that it is if unregulated, but that's a different matter. It's not a question of there being morality is not a part of laissez-faire economics. The market is self-regulating, self-governing, self-correcting. It's a natural law. It's as natural a law as gravity. And so leave the markets alone. Well, that was not just it was not just what passed for the conventional wisdom of economists. It was revealed truth. It was godly. And to interfere with free markets was ungodly. Well, the Irish, this made no sense to them. It was unfair that there were hungry people and bread. And to be said, yeah, but they can't afford the bread. The market is such, and therefore will not interfere with the market. No, that they talked about distributive justice. Catholic Church talks about distributive justice. The wealth of a society must be distributed. So we tried that in this country, beginning in 1932. And what struck me here was Franklin Delano Roosevelt in some of his fires in at least one of his fireside chats read from Pope Pius XI's Quadragesimo Anno, the 40th anniversary of Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, and he read it aloud. The New Deal interfered at every turn with markets, Social Security. Father John Ryan, Irish Catholic, Minnesotan. Father John Ryan's idea of a living wage, not a market-driven wage, but a living wage,
And an
a
8-hour
minimum
day.
wage. Every single market, labor markets, commodity markets, transportation markets, all of them were subjected to regulation during the New Deal. And the Irish, well, there was an Irish involvement, very strong Catholic involvement. And for 50 years, both parties in this country tended to live within that rule until the Reagan Revolution. Until Reagan began to say that the government is not the solution, the government is the problem. The worst words you'll ever hear in your life is when they knock on the door and they say, "Don't worry, we're here. The government is here to help you." Or Margaret Thatcher, to move it back to England, who denied that society was even a word. That she says, "I don't believe in society, so I believe only in individuals." But from 1930 to 1980, we went through what one historian has called a workers' interregnum, a time between periods when the market was revered and was not to be touched, was not to be interfered with. Where we are now, who knows? It's almost as if that's a question that is without relevance anymore. We're in an entirely different place. But certainly from 1930 to 1980 until Reagan reversed it. And to what effect, who knows?
And you see fingerprints of the Irish and Catholicism.
Absolutely. Particularly with, like, for example, Mike Quill in New York, the transit union in New York, the CIO. The CIO had a strong Irish Catholic influence, and the whole idea of an industrial union rather than trades union and craft unions. The idea of fairness, the idea of imposing moral conscience on political and political decisions. Polanyi used the word embedded, and during medieval times, the economy was embedded in society. It was embedded in it and subjected to it, subordinate to it. In the modern American, Anglo-American capitalist world, the society is embedded and subordinate to the economy. So that's the transformation that he's talking about. I dodged the issue that you just raised, but by cutting it off at 1930.
Yeah.
But does it deserve some attention? Yeah, you gave it some in your book. So this is what I'm moving toward. I thought about calling it the challenge to American capitalism, but I did want us to mirror Polanyi's use of the word transformation. So I stuck with it. I think it's a little bit stronger. Maybe it's a little bit too strong. Maybe challenge to is better than transformation of. But the New Deal did what I think came natural to Irish Catholics, Irish Catholic, working class Irish Catholics.
Mhm. Well, why don't we end here and open it up to the rest of the group? Let me just if anybody wants to join in, I'm just going to take us off the remove spotlight and open it up to whoever wants to
And
ask
you can
ask
see
a
my
question.
Bobby hand, you can see my Bobby hand poster back, Sands poster back there.
Um, yeah, so if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and chime in. Anybody?
I'll dive in.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for the Butte Irish. I've got it here on my bookshelf. Can't wait to read your new book. Um, a lot of it seems like a lot of the Irish community's leading opponents of, American free enterprise, like Father McGlynn and
Mhm.
some of the Molly Maguires who were hanged in the 1870s, Mike Quill, came from areas like Donegal and Kerry where the Irish language persisted long after it did in other parts of Ireland, and like Irish folk culture persisted with the mummers and the Wren boys. And I was just wondering if you see a connection between the Irish language and, opposition to America's capitalist work ethic or ethos or whatever you want to call it.
I think there is. I mean, Kevin Kinney, known to all of you, I'm sure, the book on making sense of the Molly Maguires makes exactly that connection. Not so much with the Irish language, but in the context of the transfer from Donegal, in this instance, to the oil coal fields of Pennsylvania. I have what I try to argue. There's a book by Eileen Kratiger, and it's called The Radical Persuasion. And she says that there were three groups of immigrants to this country that were radical before they got here, pre-radicalized: Jews, Franco-Belgians, and Finns. Well, my feelings were hurt a little bit. I thought, well, where are the Irish in all of this? And she says, well, there were a few Irish who moved toward radicalism, but they diluted their radicalism by always associating it with their culture, their history, and their nationalism. Well, I think that's absolutely backward. Their radicalism arose from their culture. It arose from the language, I think. It arose from what had happened to them. So they were pre-radicalized, not by reading Marx. They were not. If you compare, and it's worth doing, the Jewish experience, the Jewish immigrant experience, and the Irish, and there were some comparisons. They, entirely different historical circumstances, but it's history that created this culture, its language and tradition, and what has happened to them, and religious tradition. Um, on the language, I think it's interesting too that most of the Irish that we're dealing with here were from the West, were from Gaeltacht areas, what are now Gaeltacht areas. Quill's family, certainly, in Kerry, Irish speaking, and a lot of the Donegal. But Donegal has an interesting aspect to it too. Most of the early Butte guys were from West Cork, but the Donegal Irish came in later, and they brought with them, I think, a little bit of the edge of Ulster, and that's partly the case because Connolly and Larkin spent more time in Belfast than they did, well, in Dublin, obviously, but more in time in Belfast than in Galway or Cork. So maybe the Donegal influence came from that as well. But the West Cork Kerry connection is fascinating. And I wish that I took a course in Irish, but I did learn enough to know that their words mean different things. We're always saying, well, there's no good translation of this. Well, that's often true. I think that's true with any other language, but in particular with the Irish. Their word for friend did mean something very different. Their word for neighborhood meant something very different. Uh, I just wish I knew. I wish I knew more of the language and could do more with it. Um, Cassidy's book, how the Irish invented slang,
Slang.
uh, does it's a really funny book, and what's more than just funny, it's an important book, and he deals a little bit with it, but not to the extent that I think it should be done.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Towards the
wondering
end of
if-
your book, you talked a little bit about the pro-treaty and anti-treaty elements in Ireland, and you talked about it as an academic. You didn't take sides, but I would say now with the hindsight of history, would you agree that the pro-treaty adherents had the better part of the argument, or do you think maybe they sold out, the Ireland sold out its soul to capitalism?
Interesting.
The latter, but it would have been chaotic. You know, Lloyd George's threat of terrible war in 3 days. Collins knew he didn't have the money, he didn't have the arms, he didn't have the men. At the same time, there's an Irish word. It was coined in the 1830s, I think, by D.P. Moran. It's called Seaneen, a little John. And it was a term of reproach. A Seaneen was a Gombeen man was an Irishman who exploited Irish. A Seaneen was an Irishman who posed as an Englishman or who posed as an American. I even tried to I had to look up the Irish word for Sam, the Irish name Sam, because you could become a little Uncle Sam. But these were Irish who had sold out. But the proclamation of 1916, and particularly in an article pamphlet that he had written just weeks before the proclamation by Patrick Pearse called The Sovereign People, is really quite, what's the right word, leftist, just for shorthand. There was a strong socialist message to the Irish national movement. Like Connolly, obviously, who's an avowed communist, really, and certainly an advanced left winger. Connolly was Lenin thought Connolly was a quite sophisticated Marxist thinker. Lenin thought the Irish Rising was going to be the beginning of the end of capitalism. And he certainly thought it was going to be the beginning of the end of British imperialism, which, as a matter of fact, it turned out to be. Egypt is watching Ireland. India is watching Ireland. South Africa is watching Ireland. Even the Flemish are watching Ireland. So here you've got what I think I called it at one time the runt of the colonial litter. Ireland is about to bring down the entire imperial enterprise. They will not bring down the entire capitalist enterprise, but I'm not sure they really wanted to. The idea of owning something is not alien to the Irish. Even Connolly, whose communism was well known. I mean, he wrote once that he wanted every Irishman to be able to relax under his own vine and fig tree and on his own potato patch. Well, first of all, that's a very modest set of goals. But secondly, notice the key word, his potato patch. You go back to Keynes' wonderful, I think, book on the field. God, they wanted to own something. It was the only, they are an insecure people. Had I gone through anything even remotely resembling what they went through, I would have been too. So this is not intended as in any way critical. Why'd they have so many children? There's a sensibility. The Americans commented on that all the time. Well, because the kids could work, number one. And number two, they could take care of their parents when their parents got old and needed the help. And not only that, they're working class and at the bottom of the working class, and the death rate was the census returns beginning in 1880, but then extending beyond. Ask women how many children have been born to you and how many are alive. I couldn't believe going through the working class Irish neighborhoods of Butte and seeing numbers like 10 and 3, 14 and 6. I mean, on and on and on. And one of the distinguishing social features of social class division in this country was the working class died so much earlier. This too is history. And did it radicalize the Irish? That's a goofy word and not a particularly accurate or revealing one, but did it change them? Yes. And did it shove them toward what I would consider to be leftist politics? But the proclamation was that, and the Civil War, the pro-treaty group tended to be the Shawnees, and the anti-treaty group tended to be the political left. Did they sell their soul? They certainly sold what Connolly thought was the Irish soul. Very quickly on this, in this connection, there tends, even among any number of Irish in this country as well, the idea that Ireland copied the American Republic, that Ireland became a miniature America. I don't think that's true at all. The proclamation, anyway, wanted absolutely, there were a lot of republics that the Irish could have borrowed from. Ours was not one of them. They did applaud 1776. They said, great, you busted out of the empire. Good on you. And we're going to do the same. But we're not going to establish a republic that looks like the American. They much preferred, some of them played with the Bolshevik Empire, the Russian Empire. Some of them played with the French, 1870s, 1848, 1871. But what they really wanted was an Irish nation. And they'll define republic on the basis of Irish values. They didn't borrow from anybody, and they certainly did not borrow from what America had become by 1916. By 1916, you got 2% of the population controlling 50% of the nation's wealth. That's not what the anti-treaty people wanted. Not like that. You've got partition. The proclamation was addressed to, first of all, Irish men and Irish women. The inclusion of women is important, by the way, right there. It's also addressed to the people, the men and women of all 32 counties. It ignored, it said oblivious was the word, of the religious differences carefully fostered, quote, by the British government, didn't say British, but by past governments. So it's directed at all of the Protestants as well as Catholic. That's why the flag has a yellow banner or an orange banner across it, although not until the 1940s. But in any event, they tried. The proclamation was a left-wing document, not just a not just a declaration of national independence, but a declaration of a workers' republic.
If I might jump in.
Yep.
I guess I wonder what you have to say about the rise of Catholic into education in the 19th century and right up until Kennedy, actually, where you get all these Catholic colleges get established in the 19th century. And then, of course, you also have, the Catholic school systems,
Right.
Grade school and high school systems. A lot of them started in the 19th century. And so, I mean, it seems to me that it's paradoxical that in a way they were educating the youth to rise out of the middle class, out of the working class. And of course, in many ways, they succeeded in doing that. So, you get these colleges, I know Fordham was founded 1841. Holy Cross, I think, was 1846. You'll find a lot of these, I forget what year Notre Dame was started. But then you look at something like the Baltimore Catechism, which was I think designed to bolster Catholics against, the Protestant culture that they would face, that the youth of Irish Catholic youth would face in the 19th century. And then, it seems that, yeah, that this all worked to a certain extent, but it also created a middle class, an Irish Catholic middle class, and even an upper class. Your thoughts?
Well, I go back to that ditty that began the school day in Ireland in the British common schools. Thank the goodness, and I was going to read it, but I'll try to remember more of it. Thank the goodness and the grace that on me that I will become today a happy English child. Well, transfer that to the American school system. That I will become today a happy American child. Well, in 1884, parishes all over the country, following dictates from, I think probably from Rome, but certainly from the New York Catholic establishment, you get parochial schools, and that's where your kids will go to school. You're not going to sing that ditty, nor are you going to read the King James Bible, but that doesn't mean that you're going to ignore the historical tradition. But it's what always interested me, and it was commented on frequently when I was a kid. The first thing they did when these schools were started, whether it was Fordham or Holy Cross or any of them, well, Holy Cross never did do this, but they rather quickly moved to the law to establish a law school. And it was through those law schools that a lot of the movement, I think more interclass than interclass, but a lot of the movement up, a lot of the wealth was created in the Irish community. Yeah, there's no doubt that they did prosper, but they didn't move out of the culture. And only infrequently did they move out of the neighborhood until in my lifetime did they begin busting up. Well, they're not busting, but did the Irish neighborhoods begin to break up? But the schools, absolutely. That's one of the first things they did. But they also insisted that the Baltimore Catechism, that the Irish kids, the Catholic kids, all of them, although they did in New York make the Italians go to mass in the basement. But I've been reminded by some of my Butte Irish friends. But that was because the Italians didn't speak English, and the priest didn't want to go to all the trouble of having to have a sight readers. But yeah, they made a mutual accommodation, and the parochial school system was a part of that mutual. The Irish did essentially the same thing, not so much with parochial schools, but with head schools. The Irish who said, no, we're not going to go to these British schools. The priest is going to teach. Our Irish will be taught behind the hedges illegally. But we're not going to send our kids to schools where they sing little ditties about making them happy English children.
What's odd is that, if you move forward to the late 20th century, those Catholic schools are closing. The Catholic colleges are closing, and you see this kind of breakup of whatever it was that inspired their sense of themselves. I don't think it exists very strongly anymore.
I quite agree, and I look on it the same thing and with the same regret, the same unhappiness. And it's not just the Catholic school. I mean, a lot of universities they're not losing their charters so much, but they are losing their humanities divisions. History has been starved, literature has been starved, departments of philosophy have been decimated. Universities have become something very, very different from what the Irish envisioned, and really for that matter, I mean, the Ivies were established as Protestant colleges, so they're very different from what anyone had ever envisioned. But that's one of the beauties of doing history is that you get to stop when you want to. And so you get to stop before things really begin to get confusing. And so you can dodge questions like, well, how erratic are they now? Well,
So we get a first
Chris.
Catholic president. He's a Harvard graduate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and he goes to Houston and says, "Well, yeah, I'm a Catholic, but I'm a lousy one, so you don't have anything to worry about for me." Uh, but
Professor Emmons, you were quoted about a year ago in the Working Class Historical Association interview that you said, regretfully, there may be no more erratics, no more Irish Catholic erratics left in America. Would you care to comment on that? Do you think that still is true?
well, I mean, if there is one, it would be Steve Bannon. I mean, and yet this is a form of erraticism that I can make no sense of at all. It borders on, I mean, I have never watched Bannon's podcast, but I have seen clips of it. I mean, there's the sacred picture of the Sacred Heart, picture of the Virgin. The backdrop to his podcast looks like my Italian grandmother's little shrine in the back room of her house. J.D. Vance. That's a recent enough convert that, and all of us who were born in cradles know that you cannot trust converts. But no, that's not true. But you have to be careful with them. There's a different form. But Vance is now trying to turn us into well, I'm sure some of you read Trump's comments to the king 3 days ago, where he said that America is an Anglo-Saxon country, that he could have taken that entire speech out of Madison Grant, out of the worst of the nativists of the early part of the 20th century, in the case of Madison Grant. He could have taken that out of the Know Nothing playbook. He certainly could have taken it out of any number of things written by Woodrow Wilson, and he could have taken it from almost every comment that Walter Hines Page, Wilson's closest political advisor, said about blood being thicker than water, and we are Albion's plural from the book. We are Albion's seed. No, we're not. I don't know how you create a race, which is what J.D. Vance seems to want to do, but I don't know where I've read his article on from First Things on why he converted, and he didn't join a church with which I have any great familiarity, but maybe that's because I live in a place with a very active Catholic culture, but one that in the Catholic Civil War, through which we're going, I think right now, I think we are very much on the side of Francis and Leo, and so maybe it makes it easier for me. Makes it possible for me. It would be impossible otherwise. But I mean, when Leo XIV took that name, I ran outside and honked the horn. I said, this Leo is. One of the things that I try to do in the book is to talk historians of American labor to read Rerum Novarum, and they don't. They just don't. And it's mostly because they're either secular or not Catholic, and they don't want to go there. Orsi talks about it. You've got to be willing to enter into this world. You don't have to make it a permanent part of your life course, but you got to at least sneak into it long enough to try to understand it. And I don't think historians of American labor have done a very good job of that at all. But right now, an erratic well, I was going to say now he's dead now, but Michael Harrington, but he left the church. The Barragans, but again, we're back to the 1960s now. That form of Catholic Erraticism,
Gone.
it appeared Dorothy Day, convert. No, the Erraticism of Bannon comes closest right now, but it's
Eroticism of Bannon.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and I don't even try to make anything of it other than
Yeah.
we all knew kids like that when we were growing up, and they always showed up at the playground in the wrong place
There was a vice president of the Teamsters Union who was around into this century, Johnny Morris, who was the grandson of Amalie Maguire and was very much in that tradition.
there were a lot of them. I mean, McGlynn was probably the best known of them, particularly of the labor priests, but there were a lot of labor priests. Father Rice and Mike Quill were very close. And matter of fact, if anything, Rice was more radical than Quill. So yeah, it's a tradition within the church, and it's not coincidental that these are Irish names that we're using. I don't know of any Italian name you throw in that crowd.
No. Well, I think that brings it, unless anybody else has another comment, but thank you, Dave. I mean, you went longer than we normally go, so this has been great. I urge everyone to read the book. It's terrific. It really is. The sources alone will be worth the price of the title. So
Overpriced as it is.
Well,
so is everything.
Such is the way with books, but I still buy them, so it's my extravagance. But thank you very much. This has been great. Good. I know it's been out for over a year now, but it deserves all the praise that it's been getting. So thank you for joining us, and happy Derby Day, everybody.
Okay.
Right. Time for horse racing.
Watch the race. I don't even. Yeah, I have to go look at my my predictions and see who I'm gonna pick. But anyway, thank you very much, and have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Okay.
And thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was great.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Okay. And Miriam and Mariam, say hi.
Oh, okay. Right. Hi back to her.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello.